computer. So we're going to have the Chapter 5 help today. We will go through very specific things for those of you who are getting a little overwhelmed. Also, the FAQ has some help, I think, for one question. No, assignment 3 has 3 questions, so it has something for the third question, which we're not going to talk about, but look at the FAQ. And the homework questions, 2 of them, we'll go over those. And then the last lecture this week, I'm going to actually give for you an actual CBA PowerPoint to kind of give you an idea of, okay, once we're done doing all these technical things, how do we actually present the case? Because this is really the thing that is the compelling issue. No one is going to go through these spreadsheets. If you think they're boring, imagine what everybody else is going to think. So what you're going to do is actually present the case. And so we will, for the undergraduates, their Chapter 5 is their last chapter. They then have to do their project. And I'm trying to give you a flavor. So this is kind of what the final project write-up, which is described in your book, kind of summarizes in a PowerPoint. So that actually makes it a lot more powerful, I think, for you to really see me present a case and talk about what goes into that report, because we seem to be completely obsessed with these numbers, and that's not really necessarily the total focus of the report. The report really requires a full explanation, and also some of it is rousing the audience to understand what facts you have, what facts you don't have, and to make some judgment calls for themselves, because these Excel spreadsheets will not in every case have every number, and we don't want to ever imply it's all about just numbers. So it's a bit of an art, and you see me doing it all through class, making these emotional appeals for how we have to try and understand how people look at things and try and achieve a better world, a more sustainable world, through trying to actually look at some of these things and actually change a cost and benefit picture so that people will do something in a more sustainable way. So we're going to share the screen. And as always, do not look at my thing because there's so much stuff on there. It almost kills me to even watch it. So let's go to the first one, and then we will no, that's not the right one. It's this one I'm sharing. Chapter 5, help, right? That's what everybody's seeing? Okay, so again, from an efficiency point of view, we have demonstrated repeatedly that markets are very efficient. Why are they efficient? Because economic systems have to answer 3 questions. What is going to be produced, for whom, and how much, how and how much. So a market system automatically does that because sellers are searching for profits by providing buyers what they want. And they can't make a profit if they're trying to sell something that it costs them more to produce than people are willing to pay for it. So they're out there constantly exploring, even though we feel like it's driven by the businesses, it's really driven by us. If we didn't want this thing, if we didn't buy this thing, it wouldn't be sold. It's that simple. And small businesses will tell me that they feel like they're controlled by the consumers. And I think that's great. Unfortunately, that's not much fun sometimes for the small producers, and they are always striving for more power in the marketplace. And so the drive for power will enter into markets also, and we'll talk about that. Unfortunately, people love to move into the more powerful position. This is a common thing, but this is not something that economists tend to talk about. We tend to focus really on the mechanics of it and not be trying to make a judgment call as much. So again, now we kind of concluded previously that the competitive equilibrium is really a great thing. And the reason why we feel this way is because we will end up here, according to Adam Smith in the 1700s, the invisible hand, we will end up here. And again, why we love this little equilibrium point is because this demand curve says all the way down, this is the values we have. As we get more and more of something, we value it less and less. So this idea that we should ever have unlimited amounts of stuff that we want is not good. We do not value it. You start to eat an ice cream cone, it's that first, second bite that tastes really good. After that, it kind of goes downhill. This is why we stop eating it. It stops tasting good. Now, I will grant you that on Friday night, some of you may go past the point of it being positive, and you'll keep consuming until it has a negative effect. It happens. Sometimes we're irrational and we do stuff we shouldn't be doing. But on the whole, as you consume more, each additional one has less value for you. And this really helps us understand how much we want to be producing. Because we don't want to produce unlimited amounts of something. If something is not giving us benefits, then we should stop producing it. It's just that simple. And at the same time, we need to worry about the resources and their cost of those resources to produce whatever it is. So that's traced out in the supply curve. This is in fact a marginal cost curve for a small firm, small group of firms in a competitive equilibrium. So as they produce more, each individual one becomes additional one, marginal one, each additional one becomes more expensive. And why is that? Because in order to attract the resources, if we're making jeans and t-shirts, if the t-shirts, all of a sudden everybody really wants more t-shirts and the jeans are not so popular, then we want the resources to flow over to the t-shirts. So as soon as the t-shirts are able to pay more, the resources we use, the cotton we use to produce the jeans, will start going over to the more high value use. And that's why these supply curves slope upwards, because as you produce more and more, you've got to attract things that are now being used elsewhere, because your opportunity is now better. Jeans are out, t-shirts are in, so the cotton should flow to the t-shirts. If all of a sudden jeans become in and t-shirts become out, then the cotton should flow back to the jeans in order to produce jeans. So this is in fact what drives the market economy and how it can so efficiently make decisions. Because if we had to sit and figure this out, my opinion of t-shirts, if I was in charge, may not be equal to yours. So, you know, people deciding what to do doesn't work very well. But if we all go out there and vote with our dollars, those businesses will listen and they will figure out how to allocate the resources based on going to the markets and buying the resources. And they know if there's a big demand for t-shirts, they will go in and they will make that happen. So that's why we like it. Except for, we got some issues, because one of the things that gets us is we have these suppliers up here who basically will not be in the market, and they will be what I call complainers. They will want to maybe be in the market and they will try to get in the market, but they won't end up in the market unless they get a higher price, because they are not the low cost producer, or that particular one is not the low cost item. So they will not be buying or selling in this market because they're on the high cost end. And by the same token, the people down here in the bottom of the demand curve will not be buying whatever it is, because they are either unwilling or unable to pay for this good or service. But they will also argue, oh, well, if you just made the price cheaper. So this is an individual out there who's being a bit naive about how markets work and just wanting the government to give it to them at a lower price. That's basically what's happening. That's one of the things that causes our problem and why we need to worry about efficiency. So we have this complainer effect where the complainers complain. And I don't mean to give it a negative label per se. I'm just saying they're very vocal and they're able to convince people that price fixing should occur, which means the market cannot go to equilibrium because the government comes in and says, no, 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 no. We're going to fix this because there's some problem. So the two classic ones are the ones that are asked in your homework and assignment questions. The first one is a price ceiling. And this is seen actually in New York City. It's not there now, but back in the day, New York City rent was too high. People wanted prices below equilibrium. The rent is too high. The solution? Rent controls. So they just said this will be the rent. And in order for that to be a ceiling and be effective, it has to be below equilibrium. If it was above equilibrium, then it wouldn't even come into play because equilibrium would be lower than the price ceiling. So this is a classic one, and I can absolutely tell you that I know someone that lived in a rent-controlled apartment for 30 years as a renter. Her rent was controlled, and basically no one wanted to buy the apartment because you had to deal with this renter. You couldn't kick her out and you couldn't raise her rent. That was a rent-controlled apartment. So she ended up, even though she didn't own the apartment, she lived there for 30 years. She decided to retire, to move away. And the new buyer literally had to pay her thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars to move out of that thing. And then once she moved out, it was out of the rent-controlled scheme. He was able to remodel it and get big dollars for it. But this woman literally lived in a rent-controlled apartment for 30 years and got thousands and thousands of dollars for the privilege. So not only did she pay very, very low rent, but then got all this money. So how did this happen? Because you basically took away the control of the supplier to supply, and you gave it to this renter and guaranteed them that this is it. So they never move. Why would they move? Why would they move either? Or they kind of go under the table and keep it like it's theirs and sublet it. So that's thing one that we're going to talk about. And thing two is floors, where suppliers want the price above equilibrium. And that's exactly what minimum wage is, which we talked about last time. The suppliers of labor feel that their labor is worth more. Usually, if you want more for your labor, what do? You look for another job, or you ask for a raise by going in and documenting all the positive benefits that you have produced for your employer and demonstrate that your productivity, your marginal productivity, every day you come in, I make you enough money that you can pay me more and you can still earn more yourself because I'm so productive. So that's normally what would happen, but we have situations where of minimum wage, people think we should have a minimum wage. When I was young, we didn't have this. I think our first one when I was in college was $1.65, but before that, if I ever worked, I made 50 cents an hour. And that's what you made. So if you wanted more money, you had to get more skills and you had to get. So let's look at what homework 5 and assignment 5 might ask you relative to these. So here's the effect of a price ceiling. So this is in case of a rent control, which according to our little cheat sheet here, rent controls is talked about on homework 5, question 1, and on page 99 in your book. Very helpful, I would say. Okay, so if you're, for some reason, the government is, okay, we're going to bring in a worker and we're going to give them an apartment, but all these apartments are under rent control and the rent control price is here. So what's happening, you notice? You're insisting that the price is this, but at that price, we have this many people over here that want this apartment. So your whole allocation mechanism goes by the wayside. So in other ways will come in, black market, bribery, connections, any ways to get these apartments, because at the end of the day, you're going to have a shortage. You're never going to have enough apartments if you have this rent control. So you're not going to solve a housing problem. You're going to exacerbate it, because now landlords have no reason to fix up their places, no reason to get more places, because what motivates them to do that is to move up this thing, raise rents. This then comes down as the supply goes up. These people are satisfied, they find something, and we end up again here. But if that doesn't happen, we have to understand, if we have a situation where, oh, the city is doing a project and they're going to give some apartments, what's the value of that apartment? Because that's a benefit that you'll get if you bring in outside temporary workers. A lot of times you will give them places to live. We see this in Hawaii. Farm workers, they're really looking at providing them housing. So, and literally where I'm living right now, right across the street, there's a bunch of, there's a 5-star ski resort up the hill named Big Sky, and they house all their workers in a dormitory. They're immigrants. They bring them in on 3-month visas, and they house them in a dormitory. And basically because they can't afford places to live. That's why they can't get labor here. You cannot go to a grocery store and find anybody to check your bag, check your stuff. You have to do all the checking yourself. So this is kind of the stuff that happens when you have expensive rent. So we have a situation where the rent control price is here, but what is the real value of the apartment in a true opportunity cost sense? The real value of the apartment is really read off the demand curve, because you are preventing it from going to equilibrium. If it went to equilibrium, it'd be here. But if you only have this much quantity, the true value that you should use in an efficiency analysis, where's my cursor go? It is up here. It's up here. So you have a little question that asks about this, and you really need to use that value on the demand curve, because that's really what the community is valuing this at. And that's really, in fact, what it's worth. The reason why you're not charging that for it is because the government has come in there and put a distorting subsidy on things by having this rent control. And so that is a problem. And if you do an economic BCA or an efficiency BCA, then this is what you're going to have to use as the price, is that price on that demand curve, not price C, but the price really up here on the demand curve. And that's really non-monetary costs, is really the suffering that community is going to have to go through, because they don't have enough apartments, because you've artificially made the price low. So no one will increase the supply, and you will be in chronic shortage. That's what will happen. And that's what happened in New York, and that's why they took them away. We actually, I think, tried to fix the price of gas in Hawaii one time. I think it lasted for 2 months, where we said the price of gas is too high. We want it to be below equilibrium. What? That's not going to work. You can't just mandate the price of gas. So it didn't work. So 2 months later, it went away. So that is really homework 5, problem 1, talks about that issue. And I've given you in the PowerPoint the actual page in the book where it talks about it and draws pictures for you. Now, the next option is the price support, which is really the minimum wage thing, where the price is supported up here. It's above equilibrium. And what you're going to have in this case is a surplus of workers, more people wanting to work, because you have these higher minimum wages. So at the end of the day, as we talked about last time, if you have a project and it's going to come in and it's going to employ people, then you have to really, to do the efficiency VCA, you have to really have a feel for what people it is you're going to employ, because we would think the cheapest people to employ here is here. But if you're paying this wage, they may not actually, in fact, be as productive as these up here, because these people have other options. So it tells me they're more skilled. So you'll probably end up with more of these people. And I'm going to tell you that's exactly what happened when I was working on the Waianae Coast. They did an agreement with the Alun Resorts when they built out there, because they didn't want development. So they made them sign an agreement that they would hire employees from the leeward side. Unfortunately, they did not say from the Waianae Coast. They said from the leeward side. So lo and behold, they were furious 5 years later when most of the employees at the resort were not people that lived in Waianae, the unemployed that they wanted them to hire. They really hired people on the leeward side that were driving to Waikiki with experience who were quite happy to work closer to home. So they were very, very upset about this. And they talked to me about it. And I said, well, part of it is the way you structured it, because you have to understand if your goal was to hire unemployed from the Waianae Coast, they may be difficult to work in immediately because they're not as skilled. They don't have other options. They're down here. They may not be really in gear to showing up on time or understanding, basic skills. It's maybe very expensive to train them from the point of view of the resort, difficult for them to get references. If you're unemployed, there may be issues like you don't have transportation to work and these things you've never worked out. So I said, if that's what you wanted to do, then possibly you needed to understand that there's some costs that the people from the Waianae Coast might have as far as being employees that have to be dealt with before they're actually going to be seen as an employee that's very hireable at this high wage, because it's a pretty high wage. And if you're a business, you just want to hire somebody and you're going to go with the most experienced person, that's what you're going to do. So, and that's exactly what happened. So this is something that people are not quite understanding, that a business will go ahead and pick this person up here, most likely. So again, we said, if you have a project that's going to generate jobs at minimum wage, and there is a minimum wage structure that you're working with on the jobs that are coming with the project, you need to be very careful how you value that. Is it really for minimum wage? Do these people are they really having other options, other opportunities? They are if they're in this group, because they probably now have other jobs. They're here, but remember, they didn't get hired. So they found a job somewhere else because their value is higher than equilibrium. So they've gone to another market. And we need to lure them back with this nice wage on this new project. Just like the Waianae situation where they lured these leeward coast residents from Waikiki because they were paying, comparable wages to Waikiki because it's a minimum wage type, or at least a decent wage setting. I don't know, decent. It's hard in Hawaii sometimes because the wages are not that great. But if you're attracting these people that have alternative, then the value of their time and their contribution to the project is that. However, if you're hiring these people are unemployed. So what are their other opportunities? They really need to be valued at this price down here, because that's really where they're valued on the supply curve. And you may need to make some adjustments. For example, if you are unemployed, but you are able to babysit your children and you have children, you don't have to put them in daycare, that may actually be a savings for you because you don't have to deal with that. So there may be allowances you have to make in your CBA for the fact that these people are not really doing nothing. I'm not saying they're doing nothing. I'm simply saying they're not employed in a job. That doesn't mean they're sitting around having no value. This is the housewife example. Just because you're a housewife and you don't have a job doesn't mean you don't have value. So you would have to value them at this wage and then add in any other opportunities that they now have to let go because they're working. And we all know the difficulties of working. You don't have time to cook dinner, you don't have time to do your laundry. So sometimes you spend a little bit more money because you just don't have time. And that's what's going to happen when they start working, which is one of the challenges to move an unemployed person into the job setting, because there's a lot of things that they've all adapted to get what they need in an informal market that's not really a job. But that doesn't mean they're not doing anything. They're doing things, but maybe they're bartering or they're exchanging or stuff like that. So that's really what we're talking about. So again, this is assignment 5, question 1, and it's going to ask you, well, how do you value it? Well, it depends on where the labor is coming from. If it's this group here above equilibrium, then you value it here. If it's this group here, then you value it here. But my suggestion is, if you're really dealing with a project, don't expect them to hire the cheaper person for the higher wage if they can get the other group. Because for a project, you don't really care where the employees come from unless you're forced to. You're going to hire the best person for the job. That's what you're going to do. And that's rational. And for an economist, that is efficient. And I know that there's some painful adjustments that I'm talking about, but for efficiency, we just assume it adjusts. So there's that. Then there's another situation we would have to worry about. You have no assignments on it, but I just want to point it out because the book talks a lot about the non-competitive market. So if it's a non-competitive market, in this case, this is a monopoly. So we have one seller. That's their marginal cost curve. But because we have one seller, they don't end up here. They have power in the marketplace. So they will actually not produce this quantity. And so you will not get this price. They will actually produce this quantity. This is where they make the most profits. And this is not efficient in our point of view. What's efficient in our point of view is to be here. You serve more sellers. Here, that seller has power. They make what we call excessive profits because they have the power to control the entire amount of quantity that enters that market. And so we will end up with a reduced amount here, and it will be sold at this amount here. And that situation is not efficient. So when you're dealing with a monopoly, that is not going to be an efficient market, and you will have to adjust because you will, in fact, I know I keep losing this cursor. We will, in fact, be here on the demand curve because they will produce less than we want them to. That is not efficient. This is why we go after monopolies when we're the government. And we also grant monopolies. Electrical companies, we grant them because we don't know how to get away from it. And we try to control their prices and their output. I'm sure you feel when you deal with the electrical company, you're kind of a victim sometimes. This is why. They're a monopoly, they're a sole source, we have to deal with them. They have to ask what prices they charge, so they kind of get at us with other things by reducing other services. It's natural. They don't have any competition. They don't have to be efficient. They can just do whatever they want. So we try to control those. And if you're doing a CBA and you have a monopoly somewhere you got to deal with, this is a type of correction you'll have to make. You'll want to go here on the demand curve rather than here where the supply curve meets the marginal revenue curve, because they will be underproducing, and you want to move to this efficient price. This is the efficient price, and that's the price you should use. Okay, and then we talked about other instances that we need to adjust for. A positive externality, where you get this action that increases the benefits to other consumers. So we have this situation. So if we had a positive externality, the value that we really want to use for society, remember we're talking value, so that's price. This is the price we want. And we really want to have more quantity. So in these cases, you might be doing a correcting subsidy, because why are these suppliers right here not up here? Because there's no way they can charge for that excess. They can't charge for that benefit, can't charge for a pretty view of the mountain, for example. So you would want to be up here for society. That's efficient, but the market would be down here. So in those cases, we might do a correcting subsidy to get these suppliers to get us up here. And this would be the price. This would be the price, and this would be the amount you'd have to pay to get us up there. This difference times the quantity. So even though there's no questions on that, thank goodness, because I'm just going to tell you, it's very hard as an economist to predict where this demand social is. It's very hard. This is why we're not even talking about it per se, because to predict where these curves are is massive amounts of research, and then they shift. It's hard to say where they are, and we very rarely actually do this, subsidize positive stuff. We very, very rarely do this. Mostly we do the next one, the negative externalities, pollution. Normally we have pollution. This is normally the one that bothers us. And it looks like this, where the market will be here. And the reason it is because we can't charge for that pollution that these suppliers are generating in production. So we'd like to actually be here. And in this case, you would do a correcting tax. You would tax the producers of the Hummers or the whatever it is. And one of your colleagues has suggested we start taxing junk food because that is in fact a negative. It increased a lot of health costs. It really, really does. It's very expensive for society to have people eating junk food. It makes them sick. A lot of them are in lower socioeconomic brackets. And so they end up with diabetes, obesity. This is very expensive to treat. It's very expensive once they're grown to get them to change their eating habits. And I mean, I'm sure you've seen babies where they're giving them sugar water. So this goes on forever. Their teeth rot. I mean, and these people really are going to cause some major externalities for us in the form of extra healthcare costs. And they're poor. We want to treat them. We also have a lot of situations with Indigenous people that there's some issues with diabetes. So the suggestion is if we tax the situation, then they're less likely to eat that food. And that's a correcting tax. So we should be really valuing up here and not here. Exactly what the spread looks like is difficult. I grant you. How do you actually do that? And then let me point out how unpopular this is going to be. Because you're going to tax people who like their sugar. It's going to be really hard. People are not going to like. This is why this never sells. This is why we never did the big gas tax like Europe did. In Europe, they went along with it because it started in the 50s before we were addicted to our automobile thing. But in America, if we try to do that, it's going to be very hard because people get really upset about paying more taxes. They become very angry. They don't know why they should do it. But what it automatically does is change our behavior, because if we were taxing junk food, automatically people would consume less junk food. Automatically, we don't have to yell at them. They will do the right thing because they don't want to pay the tax. So they'll start changing their behaviors. Yes, they will. So this is another time when we would have a change, but in this case, it would be a correcting tax, not a distorting tax. So in these cases, this is where I want to see these are good things. And in the past, as far as negative externalities like pollution, we've just given you a number. But if you actually had to do this with a client, like my client is going to reduce pollution because they're going to do it like this, this, and this, then you would want to get some sort of estimate on the value of the pollution that your client wouldn't produce, and therefore you should let them do the project that they want to do. Or if you're the private government or the government and someone wants to do a project and you think it's polluting, then you make a case for this is how much pollution you're causing and you need to pay us right now to clean this up. We're going to tax you for this. So pay up. So we have the money to clean it up or to find a technology to prevent it. Because we got to have this money, and then we need to control our little selves to not spend it on other stuff, because that's another problem we have. We don't control our little selves, and we start spending whatever's in our wallet, but this money should be earmarked to solve this particular pollution problem. That's what we need, money targeted to specific things to fix these messes that we're in. And it's very hard to do that because politicians are only in there for 4 years, and this long-term pain thing of trying to fix these long-term problems like pollution, very difficult. That, unfortunately, fortunately for you, no questions on that. So let's just move to the last of all these assignment things I'm trying to help you with. So assignment 5, number 2, I think it's also in the FAQs. So it talks about a formula, and the actual formula is on page 131, which is not in chapter 5, I believe. It's in chapter 6, so I'm giving it to you. And it's a bit complicated, but if you think about it, it's really useful. And you're trying to get how much wages are you willing to pay, because you have a situation where you have the marginal revenue product and the value of the marginal product, right? So the value of the marginal product and the marginal revenue product, the marginal revenue product is, okay, how much am I going to pay you to work for me? And then once you do, then what you produce, how much is that worth? I'm trying to equate the two, because I can't really pay you more than it's worth, because then the business is not going to make money. So they give you the formula and they tell you E is the elasticity of demand. What is that? It's the shape of the curve. It's either really steep or really straight up, right? So it's steep, flat, in between. So they just give you a number. So you just plug it in. Just plug it in. Plug it into the equation. Then you get this over here. This goes over here. So you now have an equation right here. And if you have one more number, you could solve this thing. And the one more number comes from the fact that MRP equals the wage rate. So you put wage rate in there, and then you can solve for VMP in terms of the wage rate. I know it's a little complicated, but if you were a professional economist, this is the data that you would be looking at. We do produce elasticities, which show how steep or flat the curve is, how responsive we are to a change in the wage rate, right? Because when that wage rate changes, the shape of the supply curve changes, how much we're willing to supply, because wages are an input. And then the people buying that product will say, okay, if that wage goes up $5, I'm not willing to pay so much for this. I'm going to pay less, because I just am not willing to pay that much for it, because that wage rate is going to mean it's this much more expensive, and I will only pay this much. So it lets us figure out that new value in terms of what is that consumer willing to pay when you pay your workers more. And that's important, because if you raise up that wage rate, then maybe you're going to price all the consumers out of the market. It's just too expensive. So you think people are going to buy it, but they're not. For a professional economist, that's important. So I've given you the equations we would use, the reasoning we would use, and pretty near the answer. So that should take care of number 2. And then we have, I think, one more, and then we're done. Homework 5, question 1. And I mentioned this also yesterday, that we have to adjust prices for taxes, import duties, and subsidies. We're going to assume that these are distorting, because I kind of think most of them are distorting. So we want to take out their effects. They're distorting the equilibrium price. Anytime you put import duties on something, you're distorting an equilibrium price. You're just putting on a tax because you just don't want imports. That has nothing to do with efficiency, where resources move to their highest and best use. Listen, I know it's painful. Look at Detroit. Motor City in 1960 has not really recovered from the auto industry really tanking in the 70s and 80s. It never really has. But at the end of the day, we can't bring back, the GM and Chrysler and all these big American automobiles. They had problems because they were not paying attention. We can't bring that back. It's sad for Detroit, I know. They never really recovered. I'm sure if you're familiar with 8 Mile, it's tough for them and it's painful. Economists don't look at that. We just look at, there's an adjustment. They're not competitive anymore. So the solution seemed to be to tax imported cars. But that's not really a solution. That's not going to bring back efficiency. And it didn't really bring back Detroit at the end of the day. It sounded good. Politically, it sounded good, but it didn't resolve the problem. And I think we know that we had a big import duty with China because we felt we were importing too much from China. So we started taxing Chinese goods. And it's just been kind of a big dust up ever since. actually. So it just doesn't work that well. So we can talk about that, but the main thing for the problem is you're trying to take that effect out. So we need to go from a market price to the efficiency price. So we need to adjust for that tax, duty, or subsidy. So this is exactly in the book where you find the discussion and the formulas, and here they are. So with a tax and a duty, you take the market price and then you're adding back in the tax, because the tax is kind of subtraction, sort of, and then so you add that back in to get the market price, and then you solve for the efficiency price. You just crank it through this cute little formula here. The homework problem gives you the numbers, the market price, and the tax, and you just crank it through, and then this is what you would put for the value of that good or service in your CBM. You would use that efficiency price when you did the efficiency CBM. And same thing for a subsidy. So you would have market price equals the efficiency price minus the subsidy. So right here, that's what the formula uses. And all you got to do is solve for the efficiency price. And I've given you the page numbers and the formulas. And the reason why I'm doing this is to get you to see that while import duties may seem attractive and on the surface it may look like it produces a solution, and in fact, it's not an efficient use of resources. It results in a global inefficiency. Efficiency is not something we do at the point of the review of the community. You may still want a tax for another reason because the referent group desperately needs it. But at the end of the day, it's not efficient, and you need to understand when you're not using your resources efficiently. Because I think it's probably best if we do use them efficiently. When you don't use them efficiently, then something else is deciding who gets what, and you need to understand how to live with that. Is that fair? Don't blame the market. The problem is created when you use these distorting taxes and subsidies. So that's what we need to learn how to deal with. So anybody has questions, I'm going to stop the share. I've also noticed that the YouTubes are slow to upload. So if you're noticing a little delay, it's just seen this week they've been delaying. I actually got the one last week to load, and apparently it's my local area server that's causing the problem. So I'm not as speedy as I used to be. Let me just say that. But I did get the other one that I file dropped last week to load. And you should be good to go between the FAQ and this PowerPoint. If you cannot do these homeworks and assignments, I don't know what to say. You'll have to email me. Does anyone have any questions? And I do also hope that you understand this a little bit better, because these are just very specific graphs and not so much words. I know those words sometimes get confusing, but that's really what we're trying to do. Sort through these taxes and subsidies, some of which are totally warranted because the market is failing us, so we need to do something. On the other hand, sometimes we just can't control our little selves and we do things we shouldn't be doing, and we cause distortions. And then we have to account for those in our efficiency CBAs. Any questions? Okay, so the last lecture in the week, even though we're a little off on our syllabus, will be this kind of final report PowerPoint presentation. And then next week, graduate students will be starting on some distribution analysis. And I just have to tell you, next week this class gets to be a lot more fun, because we assume you know how to do all these Excels, and we start looking at specialized problems that you may need to deal with in a community to actually help a group with their CBA to actually target some of these specialized needs, like better distribution in a community, so that socioeconomic groups that are getting left behind might be able to sell their projects or actually convince finance people through their CBA to finance their projects or agree that it was a good investment. Banks do have to do community investment. And these groups sometimes are not sophisticated enough to sell their projects because most of the time there's not an economist in the group. So the word Giannini coefficient doesn't go anywhere with anybody. But when you know how to do these things, you can help a group sell themselves and their project. And that's very important when we're desperately seeking more social justice and more sustainability. The projects are hard to find. So when we find one that looks like it might be a go, we need to pull out our best sales pitch in order to convince people and then make sure the thing actually goes as it should. Because sometimes these things in the estimates look great, the spreadsheets look great, and then something happens because some risk came up that we thought about, but we didn't control for and we didn't warn everybody. So that's another thing we do in our CBA presentations. Earmarks of potential problems that might occur as we actually implement the project. Anybody has questions? Okay, so we're going to stop, and we've been doing very well. I think some of you, most of you on this lecture are quite up to date on your homeworks, and I can just assure you that they get quicker now, much, much quicker. First of all, there's only assignments, no homeworks. And second of all, they're just so much more interesting and vibrant. It's just a little more fun. And if you want to work ahead, there are lectures posted from last year. So you can look at those too and just get finished. Okay. If no one has questions, then we will go ahead and stop the recording.